Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. Feels like it's been a little while since I've looked at Commodore 64 128 stuff, so I think it's time to get back to doing that. On today's video, I have a package sent to me from Alex in Wiesbaden, Germany. I'm sure I pronounced that terribly, so I apologize to my German viewers. But he sent me a package filled with some goodies that I think we may find interesting. All right, let's get right to it. All right, here's the package, and boy, is it heavy. I adjusted the camera to get it all in shot. So I'm always worried when stuff ships internationally, especially heavy things. You just never know if it's gonna survive transit. I sent a picture of this to Alex, like the way I got it, and he said it looked exactly the same as it was when he shipped it. So hopefully what's inside of this survive, but it's really quite heavy, and the heavier packages are, of course, the more damage potential there is when things get thrown around in international shipping. So there's a lot of tape on this, and I'm really not sure the right way to open this. I'm just going to cut away until I start getting to the innards. Now check this out. Here's a note. Hi Adrian, this is Alex from Germany. As promised, here are 2 old Commodore home computers plus a 1570 disk drive for your channel. I hope you can make good use of the parts. I was not able to check that these machines are still working, but for the case you need to repair them, I've also put a bag of original Haribo gummy bears in the package. They will give you superpowers for your repair work. Cheers, Alex. And there they are. I absolutely love Haribos. These are my favorite. Let's just crack these open right now. I'm going to use the knife here. Let's just see how these taste. So good. You know what's interesting is I buy these all the time here in the US, but I swear the colors of the gummy bears are slightly different. Like the green ones are a little bit more green here in North America. Maybe I'll save these and without eating them all, and I'll buy some of the US branded ones and we'll compare the colors. Perhaps there's a difference in the allowed ingredients with like the coloring or something. Okay, well, here's a 128 box. And it's in German, which is extra awesome. And let's try to extricate this thing. Okay, there's the 128 box. It did seem to survive shipping pretty darn well. I imagine there's quite a few things packed in here due to the weight of this. It's a lot heavier than a single 128. Okay, I have basically no German skill. I'm assuming this means expandable to 512 kilobytes, compatible with Commodore 64 software and peripherals. I mean, obviously, I can read this only because it's kind of obvious what it's trying to say, right? Here's some more here, 128 kilobytes of, something. RAM, obviously, but I don't know what this means in German. Expandable to 520 kilobytes again. 40 and 80 columns mode. Zeichen pro Zeile. I know in German it doesn't really have silent letters. Like in English, the E might be dropped at the end, but I think in German you pretty much always pronounce that. So, Zeile. Okay, ergonomic. Is this keyboard? Tastator. Okay, this is embarrassing. I'm going to stop this now. I'm assuming this says numeric keypad with 14 function keys, maybe? 16 color, high resolution graphics. Integrates BASIC 7.0 with MiniPro, I don't know, 140 functions maybe. BASIC has commands for graphics and sound, für Grafik und Sound. And of course here, it's compatible with all software from the Commodore 64. All right, well, let's see if we can open this thing up. Figure out how that works. Okay, wow. This is amazing. Let's check out this bread bin here. This is a PAL variant German bread bin. And you know what? Considering it was pretty loose in a box, this seems to have survived quite well. Now, I know for my viewers from Europe, this is not a big deal, but the fact that it says made in West Germany on the bottom is really, really quite cool. I am loving this. But wow, this spread bin has survived really nicely. It has a couple little marks here and there that I don't even think came from shipping. These were probably from wires being stored on it. There's like a little dent in the plastic right here. But it's definitely oxidized, a bit yellow, but nothing a good cleaning. And some of my 404 plastic restore wouldn't help. All right, and right here, look at this. Commodore 1570 disk drive. I don't have one of these. Now, from my understanding, it looks like a 1541, but what this is, it's more like a 1571. Now, I don't know for sure if this is double-sided, but I think this was designed for use with the C128 and came out relatively early on. Condition-wise, it's pretty good condition. It does have a warranty void sticker here, which has been removed, so perhaps someone has been in this before. And it has the beige case that matches the color scheme of the 128 itself. And of course, on the back, it's also made in West Germany. And it is a model 1570, and as you see here, it runs on 220 volts. So I won't be able to use this in its standard configuration here in the US, and I don't actually own a voltage converter. But that's no big deal, because I have other 1541 drives that have the transformer designed for North America, and I can swap that over to this one, or I can modify this with a switching power supply, as you guys have seen before. But how cool is this? All right, here we go. This is a joystick. I don't know if this is a clone. This looks like one of those joysticks that was very common in the old days. They were black. I forgot the name of them. The color scheme was black with red buttons and whatnot. This just says joystick right here. It's hard to read on the camera, but there is no label on the bottom. Of course, it's missing a button, but it's got clicky micro switches. All right, here's a cable. It goes from the RCA RF output on the back of these 8-bit machines to the type of connector used in Europe, actually pretty much the rest of the world, for RF connections on the back of TVs. We have a Commodore 64 book here in German, which I'm assuming is an actual Commodore publication, although I'm not quite sure. Yeah, here it is, Commodore Germany in Frankfurt. And if I recall, actually, where Alex lives is pretty close to Frankfurt. It's like one of the nearby big cities to him. Neat. This is definitely a book that I don't have. Of course, I don't read German, so it's not particularly useful, but it's still pretty cool to have this. Okay, here's a cable that looks like this plugs into the RCA jack on the back of the machine and then offers a female connector, RF connector. But here's another one of those RCA to the RF connectors for Europe. Yeah, this looks like an RF extension cable where it's got the male and the female version, so I should be able to plug this in together. And yes, I can. And we have right here one of the standard Commodore IEC cables. It's not Commodore branded, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not Commodore, made by Commodore. What's this little thing here? Oh, look, it's a floppy disk notcher. So with this, you can notch the disk, flip it over, and use the other side. In case you're not familiar with these, we will take a look in a second on the bench, and I'll show this in operation on a real floppy disk. All right, here's the 128. Now, I've never seen this. It's a plastic dust cover, and again, that completely survived. And what's awesome is because Alex had put this on top of the 128, even though the floppy drive and the 64 were sitting on top of this, no damage would come to this 128 or the keyboard under here. So that's pretty cool. And this itself is okay. It's just a bit scuffed up, but it probably was like that anyways. So a good clean and a little plastic polish will probably go a long way to restoring this plastic dust cover for the 128. And I gotta say, I will use one of these. Awesome. All right, and there we have it. So it's a 128. Now I do have another 128 flat, but what I don't have is I don't have any PAL versions of the 128. And these use different video chips than the 64. So even though I have a PAL 64, it's not the same, and I can't run stuff that's designed just for the 128 that requires PAL, like PAL demos and stuff like that. And condition-wise, looks to be in really good shape. I don't see any issues with it at all, other than it's just dirty and a bit yellowed. And here we are, the serial number sticker, made in West Germany, C128. Take a look at this. Warranty void if removed sticker still intact. No one has been in this 128 before. Lastly, we have what's in these boxes here, and it is the power supply for the 64 and the 128. Now, I should have told Alex to save the weight and not send these along with this stuff, because there is definitely no way I can use these. What exactly is going on here? This is sketchy. Was this originally like a UK plug and got adapted to a European ungrounded plug? I mean, Oh, it looks like the button for this joystick is actually in the box here. And let's see if it pops back in. Oh, look at that. It does. I just don't like the feel of this. Oh, Competition Pro. Isn't that what this joystick's called? This one maybe is a clone. It doesn't feel good. All right, first thing we're gonna do is take a look at the 64 Alex Sense. So let me crack this open before I turn this on, just in case there are loose parts floating around inside. Okay, this is really a minor thing, but interesting. The screws that are used to hold this closed are quite different than the ones that I normally find on North American NTSC models. These are a lot smaller and they have pointy, sharp tips on them. Okay, let's open this up. Which version of the motherboard are we going to find? So keyboard, nothing special. I've definitely seen this type before. Interesting is the power LED has a very thin connector. All the US ones I find have a much thicker connector here. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's still compatible, but that is interesting. On the case, it's interesting. It has these weird ripples in the plastic molding here that I guess just have always been there. But also interesting is the little hooks here are not broken. And I think these are the early styled hinges, the little thin ones that do very easily snap off. Oh, and I'm noticing here that this standoff here actually is broken. It looks like it didn't survive. In fact, yep, there's a little piece of it right there. All right, RF shield, RF shield. Ooh, interesting. Instead of it being soldered onto the cartridge slot, there's actually a little slide-on metal connector for easy serviceability. Okay, here we go. What kind of motherboard is this? And is this one revision that I don't have? Nope, it's a standard one that I do have. It's the good old 250-407. And I gotta say, what doesn't really bode well, in my opinion, is that this RF shield here is a total heat trapper. And the CPU, the SID, the PLA, they're in here with no heat sinking whatsoever. There aren't even holes in this RF shield, which were definitely in some of the later ones to allow at least some of the heat to escape. This one didn't even have that. Oh, the motherboard standoff screws are also very small and very pointy. Definitely not like the C64 screws I've seen a million times on other things before. I'm going to say that this board is very unmolested and has never been opened. Oh, wow. The RF shield is not actually soldered on, and it's just this piece of cardboard. That is very interesting. I haven't seen that before. I did get a PAL board from a previous viewer, one that came from the UK. It didn't even have this RF shield because he sent me just the board. I had noticed on that board that there was no evidence of solder on this ground plane around the edge here, which is always how it is done on the US ones. The bottom shield is soldered with little tabs. Well, clearly not in Europe. They were just using this little foil cardboard thing that wasn't even attached to the motherboard except for this one clip right here on the cartridge slot, and that was it. So this thing, bye-bye. All right, here's a good shot of the motherboard. Now let's just see what we see on here for chips. Let's see if there's any evidence of rework. All right, so I noticed one thing is the RAM is not all the same brand. We have Motorola, 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 and one Motorola chip, and then we have 3 chips that are different. These are Mitsubishi RAM chips, these 3 right here. Now, does that mean anything? Not really. This could have been like this from the factory. We also have this one IC here in a socket, while the rest aren't, and this one single ROM chip here, I think it's kernel ROM, in a socket, but everything else is not socketed. Everything looks completely factory, at least from my eyes, and if someone did rework this board, they did a perfect job for these RAM chip replacements. But I am going to go out on a limb and say these are all factory installed RAM chips. 2 different brands in the manufacturing process from Commodore. That really just shows they used whatever they had lying around. From a date code perspective, the 6526s are 43rd week of 83, 4483, 3783, 3583, 4183, 3883. So definitely this machine appears like it was assembled 44th week of 1983 or later. Now with these bypass caps that kind of get flipped down and every which way, it is possible that when they get squished, they can short out the rail. And I had a viewer write to me, I think it was a 1571 disk drive that he was working on, and he had a problem where it wasn't powering up, but it turned out to be a short. So he looked around and he sure enough found that one of these bypass caps had been flattened and the leads were touching. And that was shorting, I think, the 5-volt rail, or maybe it was the 12-volt rail. So I do like to just sort of straighten these out, take a look, make sure that none of them are shorting before I power up the board. All right, so everything looks good on this thing. Time to power it up. What do you think? Will this thing work? Put your comment down in the comment section below. Let me know. This thing probably hasn't been turned on for who knows how many years. Alex probably used this machine as his primary computer. Then he got that 128, probably set the bread bin aside and never turned it on again. So it's probably not been turned on since the later 80s. So what do you guys think? Plug in the video cable into my RetroTink since that supports PAL. And here we go. Black screen. That is so not surprising. So not surprising. Well, from a troubleshooting perspective, I think the first thing we need to do is feel around for extra hot chips, especially these RAM chips. Are any of these hot? Nope. Those are all fine. All of these TTL chips here feel absolutely fine. All right, time for some basic troubleshooting. So the board is currently powered up. We need to first see if we're getting 5 and 12 volts on this thing. So let's check these voltage regulators here. All right, so the 5-volt one is giving 5 volts. That is correct. How about this 12-volt one? 12.0, looking good. That's a good sign right there. Let's check these logic chips and make sure they're getting 5 volts. All right, this logic chip right here is getting 5 volts. If this logic chip weren't getting 5 volts right here, it might mean the switch is bad because it passes 5 volts and it passes the 9 volts AC, which gets converted into the 5 volts and the 12 volts you see on these regulators. So we're getting all the voltages that we should. I'll just check one more IC right here. 4.93, that is good enough. I have found that sometimes the ROM chips fail, and that one is in a socket, and they do get hot when they're failed, but that doesn't seem like a problem. And let's see what's going on with the SID and the PLA. They're hot, but that's pretty normal. All right, well, we have the usual candidate of problem chips, but unfortunately everything is in the board except for this ROM chip. So let's bust out the dead test cartridge. Here's my dead test / diagnostic cartridge that everyone has seen so many times. So for dead test, I need to set dip switches 1, 4, and 6, which are currently set. So make sure this is powered off. Let's plug the dead test in and power this up. So we're getting a red light, which means that it is getting power, which is a good sign. All right, so dead test is in. I have the power light on. I'm just gonna try pulling it out slightly. Sometimes the cartridge slot is a little like oxidized, and if the cartridge is all the way, it doesn't always work. So pulling out a little bit might help things. But I'm currently on the monitor just seeing the white line on the left side of the screen, which is normal for a 64 and it's powered up. So it's outputting a PAL signal right now, but it is just not displaying anything. So when you're getting nothing on the dead test, that kind of points to a few things as problem spots for the 64. One is the PLA might be dead, which is extremely likely since these chips are so unreliable. The CPU might be dead because it might not be executing any code. We'll be able to check that with the oscilloscope or even the logic probe. And it could be that one of the data bus lines is being held low or high or something like that, which could be caused by bad RAM. It could be caused by a bad ROM chip, or it could be caused by one of these bad 6526s as well. If any of those are holding the data bus in a weird state, that means that the dead test can't even execute. So we're not going to get flashing. The only way you're going to get flashing if the RAM is bad or the dead test screen is if the data bus and the address bus are working properly and the CPU is executing and the PLA is working. And of course, and that the VIC2 chip, the graphics chip, which is under this cover here, is working as well. In a board like this, where nothing is in the socket, this does present a hard problem to figure out exactly which chip is bad. But let's give it a try. First, I'm going to take out this ROM chip, because if that is causing a problem, it will prevent dead test from working, and this chip is not needed. None of the ROM chips are needed for dead test to work. So this ROM chip hasn't been out of here in a million years, so I don't think my chip puller is going to work that well, so I'm going to use this chip lifter, which is a German-made Wiha brand. I'm probably saying it Wiha, something like that, right? Saying it wrong, but this will get this chip out, at least started to get the chip out of the socket. And once you take it out once, you know, it's after it's been sort of fused in there for a long time, then the regular chip lifter can pull it out. In fact, at this point, the chip is coming out pretty easily, so I can do it the rest of the way here. There it is. Pull that out. All right, I have the logic probe connected. I have it connected to the ground plane, And on the left side of the bypass cap here is 5 volts, so I clipped that on there. So that's what we're going to use for testing. And then I have called up the pinout of the 2364 ROM chip, which is this ROM I just took out. So this will be a handy location for us to check the 8 data bit lines and then some of the address lines, not all of them. The CE line, pin 20 here, is coming from the PLA, and if that's not doing anything, then that could be a good indication that the PLA is dead. Although the address lines need to be pulsing for that chip enable line to be doing anything. So if those aren't pulsing, that could point to a dead CPU. But anyways, I'm just going to set this to the side off camera so I can reference this. And I'm going to turn on the 64. Good signal. So let's just go through these pins on the ROM and see what we get. A7 is pulsing. 6 is pulsing. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 0. So those look good. Let's see, data line 0, pulsing. Data line 1 is pulsing. Data line 2 is pulsing. 3 is pulsing. 4 is pulsing. 5 is pulsing. 6 is pulsing. 7 is pulsing. And then here's address line 11. That's pulsing. 10 is pulsing. And then we have chip enable signal. This needs to be pulsing. It is pulsing. And then we have 12. That is pulsing, address line 12, that is. Address line 9 and 8. So those all seem to be pulsing. So nothing is directly indicating a problem immediately on there. So nothing on the logic probe is really telling us anything. I think at this point, I need to bust out the oscilloscope, and we have to look at those data lines and those address lines to look at the actual signal it's on them, make sure that the signals look right, because this can indicate pulsing sometimes, when the reality is it's not getting all the way up to 5 volts and 0 volts. It's like somewhere stuck in the middle. And this can give you the false impression that the signal is okay. And the only way you can really see that there's an issue is with the oscilloscope. All right, oscilloscope time. Look for the yellow line to be doing things. The computer is currently on. All right, let's start at the top again. Address line 7. That looks normal. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. That looks good on the address lines. Data bus line 0. Getting some of this stuff in the middle. That could easily be a floating bus at that point though. So this was 0 by 0 volts and that's up near the top. This one not being all the way up at 5 volts is fine. It's good enough. This one in the middle is potentially concerning, but not necessarily. And so far, all of these bus lines do seem basically the same. So that was the 3. This is data bus line 3, 4. There's 5, 6, and 7. Here's an address line again, 11. There's 10. All right, so this is interesting. This line right here, oh, now it looks better. This was the chip enable line. Now when I turn the computer off and on, this is more what I would expect to see as it's trying to select that ROM. Let's check the ROM right next to it. So that one is just, so this is the ROM right next to it, sort of stuck at the top. I think it's the, basic ROM. Actually, and now when we take a look, the address lines aren't even pulsing. So I power cycle the computer and it seems stuck. It's not even executing anymore. Now what happens when you turn on a 6502 based computer like this is it goes to the reset vector, which I think is all Fs, or it's near FFFF. And the address bus for that is going to be all mostly 1s. So this is kind of what I would expect to see when the computer is trying to turn on, basically. I'm looking at the various address lines there, and they're all just near the top. So I'm going to put this ROM back in, which might be faulty, and we're going to take a look at the address line again when I turn this on. And look, it appears that it's actually doing something now, like the computer's trying to run. Although, yeah, I mean, I guess that's normal running. Okay, I think I found a potential problem poking around. So I have the original ROM back in, and we are looking at address line 8. That looks pretty normal. You know, it's just activity going on. Here is address line 9. Similar, right? Address line 12. That doesn't look right. Why is it having this slow rise time? Kind of does, and then it sort of stabilizes on that. So that looks bad. Let's check chip enable. Chip enable looks fine. Address line 10 looks fine. Address line 11 looks fine. I should have gone right to this. I'm going to check all the address lines. I'm going to check pin 7, which is address line 0, all the way through address line 15. So that's all of them. You can see if any of them are messed up or just that one, I think it was A12 that we saw. Whoops. Here I'm on the CPU, and there's address line 12 looking just as screwed up as it was before. Address line 13 also is not looking particularly good. 14 looks screwy as well, as does 15. So what exactly is on address lines A12 through A15? The ROM chips are only on address line 12. So if the ROMs were causing a problem, they wouldn't be affecting those other address lines. But what is on address lines 12, 13, 14, and 15? The PLA chip. That is on all of those address lines. Now the VIC-2 chip also has address line signals on it, and you can see here it has 11, 12, 13, 10, but it doesn't go all the way up to 15. So the fact that this thing, which I think these are multiplex lines here, aren't on those address lines rules out the VIC-2 as a problem. So for me, I think I have two culprits here. I have either the PLA, which is the most likely thing to be failed because these just fail nonstop, or the CPU is bad. But I'm going to wager, because of past experience, that it is the PLA that's the problem. So I'm going to remove this chip now and install a socket, and we'll see if that fixes this computer. Okay, here's the old PLA. Here is a socket installed. Let me put one of these GAL-PLAs in. This is Daniel's project. I'll put a link in the description if you haven't seen the video on this. This PLA replacement can cost you as little as like $3 if you make 10 of these, you know, when you order the parts and whatnot, but they're very easy to assemble and you just need inexpensive equipment to program these chips, and this thing should last forever. I have installed the original ROM back in this thing, so it's all stock except for the replacement PLA, and the monitor is acting funny, so hopefully this works. Let's turn this on. Do we have a picture? Oh, look at that. Thumbs up to a successful repair. Another dead PLA. Let me just draw an X on this, and you know what I'm gonna do. And I'm gonna put this bad chip in my dead parts plastic container. I'm gonna soon have to get a larger one because this is kind of getting crazy on how many bad parts I have replaced on these old 8-bit computers. Okay, I have the 6510 pin out again. I'm just going to quickly check those address lines once again, and we're going to see what they look like on the working machine. So address line 15. Oh, you know what? Look at that. How it actually has that weird rise time thing still going on. And this is address line 14. And it's got that happening as well. There is 13. And check it out. Look at address line 12. And this is on the working computer. It's running right now. And we have that same ridiculous looking waveform. So clearly the signals I saw that I thought looked bad, which pointed to the PLA, actually are normal. And I guess I never realized that before fixing all these 64s in the past. So I switched out the PLA thinking it was most likely candidate for a bad computer, and it was, but that was sheer luck. Now, if you've troubleshooted a lot of 64s before and you saw a signal that I showed on the oscilloscope that looked bad, that might have pointed to the PLA, please let me know. But I just went through all the signals and I actually can't tell a difference. Everything looks basically the same to me. Now, one of the reasons why I keep these dad parts is one day I kind of hope to go back and make a bad PLA troubleshooting type video where I can look at all the signals on the bad PLAs and see if there's a commonality of something that fails quite often on those chips. I think that would make a pretty interesting video. There's probably 7 or 8 or maybe even 10 dead PLAs inside this box. So I have a large sample size to go off of bad chips. All right, well, to know if this 64 is actually working correctly, I need to plug in my diagnostic harness. This is the one that Sven sent me. Well, he sent me the PCBs. I built it up the rest of the way. And this will allow me to test with the right cartridge to see if all of the I/O ports and everything else is working on this machine. Oh, PLA test bad. That's odd, especially because I'm using my GAL-PLA. 82S100 U17 does say is bad. Huh. So far everything... else is fine. The SID is sounding okay as well. But let's just let this run through again. In fact, okay, that's weird. I just ran the test again, and now PLA test says shows fine. So maybe that was just a little bit of a glitch or something. I'm not too sure. Now, this is the slightly modified version of this test. Let me turn the speaker down. That actually shows you the checksums of these ROM chips here. It doesn't just say okay. And that means if you switched out one of these with a different ROM, you might be able to tell what it is. In fact, it shows the kernel version down here as 22703, which is the later kernel ROMs. Anyhow, with everything showing good on this test, that means that this machine should be operating perfectly. Okay, I have the 64 booted up into EasyFlash. It is working. I just need to plug a keyboard in, so I'm actually going to use the one from the Ziff 64 because the one that Alex sent probably has keys that aren't working. It's going to require disassembly and cleaning, so I'll just stick to this one to do some actual testing here. All right, I'm going to go to G. Adrian's Tools. This is my EasyFlash tool set. 99% of this I didn't write. I just sort of combined this together in an easy-to-use library for myself so I could run this stuff much more easily. So I have the SID tester, which you have seen on my channel before, and I'm going to see how the SID sounds. Well, that worked well. This SID does appear to be working totally fine. So I think everyone knows what that means. It's time for an 8-bit dance party. Here we go. Now the music sounds much slower than on the NTSC machines, but that's how it's supposed to sound. One thing about this particular SID, while the sound is fine, it's pretty darn noisy. There's just a lot of background noise on it, which varies from SID to SID quite a bit. That's just how it is. Try harder next time. So everything is working great on this machine now. One thing left to test is the keyboard. Oh, interesting. I just noticed it doesn't have that ferrite ring on it that all the US keyboards have, sort of. This one does not have that. I guess it was not required in Germany. Well, believe it or not, everything appears to be working perfectly on this keyboard. The only key that's not quite perfect is Enter. Really, all that's left is a little cleaning, and nothing that a little Windex and elbow grease will make this thing look as good as new. Well, and a little 303 to give the plastic a little bit of its sheen, nice shiny sheen back. But otherwise, awesome. Well, I'm sorry to end it here. That's going to be it for part 1 of this video series. In part 2, we're going to look at the Commodore 128 and the disk drive that Alex sent me. So watch for that video coming up soon. And if you enjoyed this video, I would definitely appreciate a thumbs up. But if you didn't, you know what to do. You can hit that thumbs down button. Hit that subscribe button if you want to subscribe to my channel. It really helps. And hit that bell icon if you want to be notified when I upload new videos. And I'd love to hear about your comments and your suggestions down in the comment section below. So put those there. I appreciate it very much. And that's going to be it. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.